Okay, so if everybody's ready, today some more advanced modeling techniques. Specifically, the ones that I want to cover, and I don't know that I'll get them all done today, but I want to talk about the Lathe Tool, Extrude Tool. Those two tools start off with a two-dimensional object and turn it into a three-dimensional one. And this will help you with the little ring you want to create. There's also a torus shape that is the ring that you want, that is or a donut-like shape that can be reconfigured using the numeric requester, and you can make it any size and thickness and stuff that you want. A torus is nothing more than a donut or looks like a ring. There's other ways of generating that shape as well. Somebody wanted like a corkscrew kind of shape. You can generate that using the Lathe tool. It's simply taking a two-dimensional object and it's spinning it. And you can create a glass, a bottle, anything that's symmetrical that you could conceivably generate if you were building it on a lathe. Everybody knows what a lathe is, in wood shop. Same principle. Extrude, think of anybody used to play with as a kid Play-Doh, and you had one of those little things that you shoved the Play-Doh in and you squeezed it and it came out. That's sort of in a star shape or some other, it's like look like churros or something, that extrudes it out. That's what an extrusion is. Then the others are the Boolean functions that I want to make sure that we cover. And Boolean functions require two objects, sometimes 3D and 2D, but most of the time what we'll start with are two three-dimensional objects. It's a way of taking two objects and joining them together as one, so you can build and construct a model that way. Or, and it actually joins the geometry together instead of just placing them together. The other things that you can do with them is that you can take two objects, for example, overlap them, and you can use one as a cutter. So one will actually serve to cut away from the other object. And that can be kind of nice. There are limits and there are strengths to each of these techniques. The other choice would be when you overlap two objects, that whatever area is overlapped would be the part that remains. So those are typically the 5 different functions that we have. So let me start with the Lathe tool, and that's pretty straightforward. Most of these are found under multiply or modify. So we're going to start with a two-dimensional shape, and so you wanted to learn how to use or to create a disc, okay? So, or a donut-like shape, a ring. Does that make sense? A ring, donut, whatever. Anything that can be lathed. So I'm going to come out over here to the side, and I'm going to create a little disc here, like so. I'm going to look over here in the radius in my numeric requester to make sure that X and Y are the same. They don't have to be, but I want to make sure that it's perfectly circular, okay? So look at from the front view, and you can see from the top view, it's perpendicular to it, so it just looks like a little line there, and you really don't see anything yet from perspective view. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to multiply, and you'll see that we have the tools that I talked about today. We've already used bevel. We have not used edge bevel or rounder yet, but those are pretty cool, and I will cover those either Wednesday or next Monday. But what I want to focus on today is the Extrude and Lathe tool. So I'm going to use the Lathe tool. And by selecting that now, or you can come over to Actions, and you have to have actions really to effectively use this visibly. I'm going to go ahead and reset, and I'm going to go ahead and activate, and when I do, notice what it does. It takes from the center point and it spins it around. And you'll notice it, by default, it has 24 sides. Remember, you can click in there and add sides, or you can use the spinner to the right and you can add. Now, something I did wrong, and it's not a big deal, but does this donut shape in perspective view look a little bizarre to you at all? Yes or no? No? Okay, watch what happens. If you lathe or you extrude the wrong way, remember I started with a polygon that was one-sided. Okay, it's not double-sided. So if the wrong side is facing out when it's lathed, it really looks like it's inside out. when I'm done with this, I can either lathe it the opposite way, do the end angle at a minus negative 360 degrees, or when I'm done with it, another way to do that is to hit the F or flip, and now notice the difference. Do you see the difference now? You have to pay close attention because that will occur when you use extrude as well. So the size can be any that you want. It can, another possibility would be, let me undo this a couple of times and let's lay this again, because let me show you some other options here. Actually, before I use lathe, I want to do something. I'm going to go ahead and flip it in advance. So if I flip it, you'll notice that this will take care of the problem. Select lathe again, and let's go ahead and select activate. And what you'll notice, look at these blue widgets. I mean, that's what I call them, these little blue tools that are similar to the weight maps that we use when we right-clicked or whatever, or the widgets that you see when you generate a primitive. Well, one of the things that we can do is we can come over to the edge, and I can do this in any view, and notice that if I only want to lathe it part way, I can. See how I'm clicking and dragging? And if I look over to the right, the end angle is 177. What if I wanted exactly a half a ring? You know, then do it 180 degrees. So that's, you know, another way that we did this is we used a primitive, we added geometry, and we used the bend tool. That's another way of doing it. Okay? Another way of doing it would be to use, we'll show you, is in a similar fashion, is to start with a primitive and use Boolean modeling. That's probably the least effective of them all. Now, some of the other things that we can do too is that from the center, we can change the diameter from here. Let me click and move this out, okay, like so. We can also, as you can see, I hit this and we can bend this so that it can change the angle from here. This is really difficult to control from here, I find anyway. It's easier to reset from here and to work from, more often than not, work from the numeric requester to get the result that I want. Now, there's something else that we can do with this too, and it's a little bit more advanced. See, I didn't want to do that. Let me undo that. Let's lay this again. Reset, and let's go ahead and activate so it spins around. I wanted to reduce the, I didn't want to do that, come on. That's, no, come on. Let's do it again. Let's work it from here then. There we go, I wanted a smaller ring. Now, what if you wanted to create a spring or a corkscrew-like effect? It's the same principle, only instead of one revolution, we're going to do multiple revolutions now. And then we're going to change the offset at the bottom. So what I can do now, start angle is 0 degrees, end angle is 360, but I can really crank this up. You know, and at this point, it doesn't really look like anything. Oh, come on. Let me, 10, 5, I'm going to put 1500 degrees. Okay, so it's multiplied 1500 times, and we're going to have to add geometry. Now watch what happens when I change the offset. And I move it up. Okay? So if we move this down, doesn't look like much of a cork, but the reason it looks that way is because of the number of sides that I specified. Remember, I only said 24, so that's not too many. But if I start to use the spinner here and add geometry to this, notice how it smooths out, and I get my little curly, kind of like a spring-like. Same tool, same principle. So this is the lathe tool. Now, I'm starting with a simple circle, but imagine if you would, because I don't want to go into too much detail because there are probably better ways of doing this, but what if you wanted to create a glass or a bottle? Let's think of a bottle. You wanted to create a wine bottle. We could use the Bevel Tool, which we'll probably use later when we start to use organic modeling to build something like that. It would also be possible to use the Lathe Tool. All you have to do from the center to the outer perimeter is to create a silhouette, maybe in Illustrator, using and having a simple path to create that shape. So it's if you're looking at the bottle, it's just half of it. And you take that half, that simple silhouette, and then you lathe it, and you have your bottle. So that would be another way to do that. Not too many people do use that anymore, but it is valid. A valid way to work. But for you to create your ring, I mean, think of anything. Any two-dimensional shape can be lathed, and it doesn't have to be 360 degrees. It can be more, it can be less. It's almost like extrude, but typically what it's done is you're doing at least 360 to get another type of three-dimensional object. Okay, ready to move on to extrude? Okay, so I'm just going to switch to turn that off. We're going to switch to another layer. And we're going to start again with a two-dimensional shape. This time I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to work from the front view again so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start with a ball again. But this time, instead of 24 sides, I'm going to make it 8. Okay, and you'll see what I'm going to do in a minute, because I want to create sort of a star-like shape. So here's 800 by 800, and I want to flip it so I can see the right side. And actually, I blew it. Let me come back again. I want to do this again. Ball, action, I'm going to go ahead and activate. But instead of 24 sides, I want to reduce it to 8. And you'll see why in a minute. So I have an octagon, correct? And I'm going to go ahead and flip it so that it's right facing. And now what I'm going to do with points is I'm going to select every other point. And now what I want to do, mode, make sure its action center is center of selection. What I can do is resize it under modify. And now when I bring it in, see how I get my little star shape? Now it's start thinking this way. Turn that off, turn the size tool off, deselect. And now I want to turn this into a three-dimensional form. So now what I can do is I can go back to multiply and we can select extrude. So you work from now the angle that's perpendicular to it, and you click and you drag. And it doesn't have to be perpendicular. It can be at an angle, or it can be straight like so. Now when we look at it, this is the Play-Doh effect I was talking about. Okay. Now, if I were to select OK, I'm done with the extrude, and I look at this, it's correct. But remember, if I had the two-dimensional polygon facing the wrong way, it would look like this. See how it looks inside out? You're looking at the inside of it, and when you look at the other side, you're looking at inside, outside. That's because it was flipped the wrong way. So again, just by hitting F, flip, it flips the polygons in the right direction, and now the right side is facing out. So to use the extrude tool, you start with one shape. And again, you just click and drag it perpendicular, and you get a three-dimensional shape. Now, if you want, when you extrude it, you can add additional geometry. You can subdivide it. There's a variety of things that you can do. That's pretty much it. Okay. There is a variation on this, though. It's called the skin tool. What I'm going to do is from the front view here, again, I'm going to select the ball. Now I'm going to select action. I'm going to go ahead and activate. We're going to start with this shape. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and fix it. And I'm going to hit T for move. Whoops. Make sure I hit the right one. T for move and move it down here. And I'm going to make sure that I'm pretty sure it's facing in the right direction. Now on the same layer, I'm going to go ahead and select the Bevel Tool again. And I'm going to select Action, and I'm going to select Activate. And you'll notice that we have two of the same shapes. Everybody see that? Two octagons, one-sided, and both sides are, at least they're facing in the same direction. I'll deselect it, but what I'm going to do now is what I had done before. I'm going to select every other point. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select under Modify the Size tool, and I'm going to resize it. So this, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Oh, never, Mr. Bill, Mr. Bill. Let me deselect. Let me go ahead and turn off size. I goofed. My apologies. I'm going to work from here, make sure that I click this, and I'm going to do every other one from here. It doesn't matter which one, it really doesn't. And now I'll go ahead and I'll resize and I'll move it. So I'm only changing one. Okay? Everybody see what I've done now? So we have one. They both share the same number of points, but they have a different configuration, don't they? Now what I can do is I can join these together and turn them into a three-dimensional form. And again, we go to Multiply, and it should be under More. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, where are you, where are you? No, you're not. Am I missing it? It should be Skin. Ah, never mind. Let's select. Let me make sure I have both selected. Now let's go back, because it's here. It wasn't available. It's still not. It says Create Skin. Why can't I do it? Why can't I do it? Kirk. What am I forgetting? So how about if I select a point here? What do I have selected here? There we go. Now let's come back again to Multiply. More. Don't have Skin selected. Kirk. Kirk. Shows you how often I use it, huh? Okay, well, I'm going to have to come back to it. Amber Rose, do you remember how to use the Skin tool? Skin tool. It could be that these need to be on separate layers, but I don't think so. Because when we get to Boolean functions, they do have to be on separate layers. So, what am I forgetting? Okay, well, I'm going to pretend you didn't see this, and I'll come back, because I'm clearly forgetting something simple. Let's move on to Boolean. Okay, I just covered under Multiply. I covered the Extrude, and I covered Lathe. We've already used before, we've used Smooth Shift, and we used Bevel. So they're all kind of fall into the same category. Now we're going to use under Construct Boolean, and you'll see that they are here and they are presently grayed out. To use most of the Boolean functions, you have to use two layers. to do this. So this is how you do it. Let's come back to create. Let's start with a box, and I'm going to go ahead and action, reset, activate. So I start with a box, and I'm going to move the box over here like so. Okay, and that's all I want to do. Now on another layer, I'm going to put the box in the background just to see it for position, and I'm going to now create a ball. And I want to reset, and it can be any these can be any three-dimensional forms. They don't have to be just a cube and a ball, but oftentimes you do use primitives to do this. So let's reset and activate it. Now we have a ball. Now I'm going to move this over the corner like so. And I'm going to fix the ball in place. So notice that they overlap. Probably the ball, just for the heck of it, it doesn't have to be, but I'm going to size it and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to hit T for move, because I really want, whoops, T for move. I want it to be substantially bigger so that there's a real clear overlap between the two. Everybody see that? So two three-dimensional forms. In this particular instance, they both overlap one another. One is in the foreground, one is in the background. That's important. The one that's in the background is the cutter. So now we switch to construct, and with these two layers visible, one foreground, one background, we're able to use the Boolean functions now. So now I can select Boolean, and I have 4 options. I can unite them. I click OK, and you'll notice that it turns in. If I turn that one off, you'll see that they have been joined together into one form. Look at what we see over here in the wireframe view. They are now one form. They're not simply two objects overlapped one another. So for example, if I hit Q and I create a new surface, combo surface, and I select red or any color that I want here, or blue, nice blue. Now obviously because they're on the same layer it would affect it too, but notice what's happened here. If you select one point, or maybe we use the drag tool on one of the points that overlaps, so let's use modify, let's use drag, and we click and drag. See how they are connected? Okay, so let me undo a couple steps. And let's put this back in the background again. So once again, that was to unite them. We can also do intersect. What intersect means is that wherever they overlap, that's the only part that will remain. So now if I select intersect and I click OK, I do that, and you'll see what's left. Notice what was the cutter, was the background, and notice what else goes away. They actually both go away. And now we have another option. We go to Boolean again, and now I'm going to select subtract. Again, the cube is in the background, it becomes the cutter. So when I click OK, look at what happens to the sphere. See how it's cut part of it away. Now, what if I were to reverse that? If I have, I put the cube in the foreground, and I put the sphere in the background. And I select Boolean again, and I select subtract, and I click OK. Now watch what happens to let's turn that off. See what happens to the cube. Very different outcome. Now, the good side to this is it's easier to make really drastic modifications. And for certain functions, Boolean works really well. The downside to this is if you plan on doing any organic modeling, meaning remember how we hit the tab key to make the little mitten hands? You're restricted to 3 and 4 point polygons when you do that. And when you use Boolean modeling, where they intersect and how they combine oftentimes results in polygons that far exceed 4 points. And then you can't use that form of modeling. You might be able to do that at the very end if you wish, but if you plan on doing Boolean or any organic or subpatch later on, and you use Boolean ahead of time, it won't work. There will be a conflict later on. So for building items that you can imagine were created in a fashion that where you would use machine-like tools, in a wood shop or a metal shop or something, it really makes a lot of sense to still use these in many cases. It can also be used for poking holes, a different way of poking holes through objects. Let's do that. Let's do a different way of doing that. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this, come back and look at this in the background, and then let's go ahead and create a cube, for example. So let's, you can do this a variety of different ways. So I'll create a box, and I'm going to click like so. Whoops, box. I can't even think here. Box, like so. And let's give it some thickness here. And I'm only going to have it go part way through the first go around. Okay? Everybody see what I'm doing? I'm going to reverse this because I want this bar here to be a cutter. And it has to overlap, but I want to poke a hole in there. Now, a better way to do this would be to use the Bevel Tool. But this is an older way to work, and sometimes it works really nice. Like Sarah Wade, who usually sits over there, made a pair of dice last semester. And the little dimples, for the 1, 2, the 3 dots, she used this function to cut out the little dimples overlapping a sphere on top of a cube to cut little dents out of it. And that's, as far as I know, that's the only way you can do it effectively. So now what we'll do here is we're going to go back again to construct, and I'm going to select Boolean, and I'm going to select subtract, and notice what happens. So we just want this now, and see how it cuts through, but it only cuts part way through because I had a partial overlap. Okay? Well, what if I wanted to cut it all the way through? If you wanted to create windows, doorways, or something like that, it's not a bad way to work. So if we were building an interior and you wanted to make way for a doorway, some windows, and we weren't doing it by way of the mapping techniques that I showed you, you wanted to structurally make these changes, then this would be the way to do it. So you go ahead and we select the background now. Actually, I want that in the foreground, and this is the background for a moment. Hit T for move. Make sure this completely overlaps and goes all the way through. And now we're going to switch again, put that in the background. This bar will be the cutter. Go to construct, use Boolean, select subtract, and see now how it cuts all the way through. You see that? You can see all the way through it. But notice what it does to the geometry here. So if I were to hit the tab key, it doesn't like it. Only faces where 3 or 4 vertices can be converted to subpatch. And then you get this. See how it gets really wonky? It just doesn't work anymore. Ready for some more? Does this make sense? Sort of. Let me show you a fun one. It's based on Extrude. It's a combination of extruding, but it's along a path. And so it combines functions similar to Boolean as well as the Extrude tool. And you need 2 separate layers to do this. Okay? And the purpose of this would be, and some of you for your toy may want to do this. Maybe it's a pole toy and you want to create a string. Maybe you want to create a garden hose or something like that, or you want, maybe for the final assignment you have a phone and you want to create a chord of some sort. Well, this is how you do it. We're going to start, as we did with the first extrude, by creating a two-dimensional shape, like so. And I'm just, again, going to use 200, 200. That's good. I'm going to flip so it's facing the right way. Okay, so I have a disk. Now what I'm going to do on a separate layer, look, using this one as a guide here, I'm going to go to create, but I'm going to come down here and I'm going to use a sketch tool. And with a sketch tool, I can make a path. It's a very crude path, but it's a path nonetheless. And I want a curve, not a face. So from the top view now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag and make a little wavy line, like so. Everybody see what I did? It's just a line in space, two-dimensional path. And I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, and I'm going to move some points so it really goes, it bends and curves in three directions. So we'll go ahead here. I don't need sketch anymore, but instead I'm going to use modify, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use stretch, and I'm going to stretch it from here, stretch it out a little bit. I'm going to hit T for move, and I'm going to move it so that this lines up with like so. And then from the side view, I can use the drag tool, and maybe I can move one of these points up a little. I can use some of these down, move these down. So you can see now that this path is just going in all sorts of directions here. Okay, everybody see how this is twisting and turning here in space, the line? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, and I guess need to, I'd flipped it when I shouldn't have. There we go. It looks right. So now I have the disk in the foreground, I have the path in the background. I want the disk to extrude and to follow along that path to create my wire, my hose, my whatever. So to do that, we go back to multiply. And what I want is not rail extrude, but I want, yeah, I do want rail extrude. I'm going to use rail extrude. Select it. And what I have the option to select now is automatic, which is what I select by default. And it will put 20 knots in here, meaning it will use 20 divisions in there. You can also do uniform lengths and uniform knots, and you can specify the number of knots that you want in there. You can also make sure that it is oriented to path. And that is important in how if you want to make sure that it follows the path in a uniform way, then you have to make sure that whatever two-dimensional shape you start with is perpendicular to that path at the get-go from the very start. Does that make sense? If it's tilted, it's going to extrude at that tilted angle. So let's use automatic and see what we get, and look at what we get. You'll notice that there are some kinks in it that it can't, based on the size of my disk, it couldn't quite follow that path that well. So maybe I should come back and I should take the disk and I should, just to show you, I can resize it a little bit. I'm going to resize it from mode, center of selection. We're going to make it just a little bit smaller. And now watch what happens when I go back to multiply, making sure that the disk is in the foreground, the path is in the background. And I go ahead and I select rail extrude, and I'm going to select automatic. And notice how the kinks are lessened. There's one here because it just can't seem to follow it that well, but it looks pretty good. So imagine if you take the time to make a very intricate path, you can create some pretty gnarly looking shapes. And see how it created these automatic knots along here to follow the path. Now what if you wanted it to follow the path, but you didn't want it absolutely smooth? Another option would be to rail extrude, and we're going to use uniform lengths. And I'm going to leave the default setting at 20. And you'll see that there are 20, it basically extrudes this along that path 20 times. And now it looks like kind of a bent up straw, you know, somebody who's taken it and kind of bent it in several places. It doesn't have that smooth, uniform look that it did before. You can also use rail extrude, and let's change this to 5. And remember, this can be any two-dimensional shape. It could be a star shape, diamond shape, you name it. Doesn't matter what it is. Uniform knots, that was uniform lengths. We just have uniform knots. And now you can look at it, see how it looks considerably different. And it doesn't really even follow the path anymore, so that doesn't work for us. Okay? You ready for a little bit more, or is that enough for today? You want some more? Okay. So, next step, I should probably start deleting some of these. I want to go back here for a minute, because remember I had, where was it? This one. Huh?
I think you have to be in polygon mode for the skin.
Is that where I screwed up? It could be. You know, it's one little thing that can mess you up. I do know that you have to have two, for skin, they have to be two individual shapes, two-dimensional shapes. They have to have the same point count. They cannot have a different point count. And that will work. So let's try again. Let's go back down here to more. No, create skin isn't here.
So you have to select both.
Huh?
You have to select the shape. The points have to be selected.
Okay, so just select the points instead.
Well, in polygon mode, you have to select it. We both have to select it.
Well. Okay, but I was thinking why it would work is that if, remember the principle of nothing is selected, everything is selected, and there are only two, but you're right, it probably wants us to select them. Okay. They're just, you want me, when I'm done with this, you'll see why I'm not doing so well, because I don't use this tool anymore. There's another way of doing it that I think is just as effective that I've done before. And because there's typically 2, 3, 4 different ways of doing the same thing. So now let's go down here to more, and let's select, and you're right, skin is selected, so there we go. And see how it's inside out? So I have to hit F for flip, and that didn't help me. So that's okay. I'm going to go undo, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit F for flip. Or better yet, what I need to do is I need to take one of these, right? And I'm going to flip it. So each of these are facing outward. And now I select them. See how each are facing outward? And now I go here and I'll select skin. And that works much better. See the shape you get with that? That connects the two. But as I said, there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing this. So let me undo this. And I'm going to show you a different way of working, just to show you that it's easy to forget about things, as I'm doing here. I'm going to go ahead and select this one and cut it. And I'm not going to even select the Bevel tool, or the Extrude tool. I'm going to use Bevel, because Bevel will get me the same place. Bevel and Extrude can work very similar to one another. So instead, I'll go ahead and I'll click B for Bevel, or click on the Bevel tool as it were here. Just click once. It adds geometry to it. Hit T for move, and I go ahead and I move. Whoops. Come on. And nothing happens. There we go. Let's try again. B for Bevel. Click. Turn it off. T for move. And let's go ahead and select this polygon and hit T for move, and notice that it's same principle. It's beveled, or it's extruded. Okay? Okay, so I have the same result that I would have had with the extrude tool. Now what I can do is I can switch to points. So let's deselect, let's hit T for move, let's turn it off. And now let's select points. So I'll switch to points. I'm going to select every other point as I did before. And I'm going to resize that end, and I'm going to bring them in. So we're going to select the points, make sure that mode is action center of selection. And I'm going to go back to modify, and I'm going to select size. And now if I resize it, it doesn't look so hot. What am I doing here? It's flipped the wrong way. That's okay, but notice that I have fundamentally the same shape. So let's turn off size. Let's deselect, and let's select this polygon here. Whoops. Switch. Select polygon, and flip the polygon. And now it's facing the right way. Now I have the same shape I had before using the scan tool. And this one is shaped, flipped the wrong way too. So. Oh, come on. Selecting. I don't want that. I've got it flipped inside out. So you get the idea. Okay, some more Boolean. Anyway, different ways of doing the same thing. More Boolean functions. I'll go ahead and delete that. I'm just going to delete all of these now. Go back to layer 1, and let's start with a ball. Reset, activate, and we have a ball. That's all I want. And now what I'm going to do is in front of it, on a separate layer, I'm going to go back with the ball again. And this is pretty much what I had done before. I'm going to create one of those little star shapes. Okay? So I'll start with a disk in front, like so. 200 by 200. Zoom in here so I can see this better. Oh, Kirk. Let's do this again. Ball shape. Activate. I want 8 sides. Select every other point to resize it. Notice that these are, again, these are on separate layers. Modify, size, shrink it in so I have my star shape. Deselect, hit T for move, and this is the important part now too. T for move, and I'm going to move this out here, like so. So everybody see what I've done here. I have a ball. I have the star shape. Let's put the ball in the foreground. Let's put the star in the background. The star is going to be the cutter because it's in the background. And what I want to happen could be one of 3 things. When I go to construct and I select Boolean, actually that's not what I want. I want drill. Drill is a Boolean function. But with drill, you can only drill along the X, Y, or Z axis. Which axis am I going to use? Correct, Z axis. Because the star shape is going along the Z-axis here. Can everybody see that? Zoom in here. Whoops. Let me zoom in so you can see before I actually do it. Let's flip this around. See? The way I created it, it doesn't have to be, but that's how I set it up. The cutter has to slide along the rail of the z-axis. So let's go ahead and select drill again. I want the z-axis. If I select X or Y, you won't see anything happen because it'll just cut along those axes. And it cuts all the way through. And you have 4 choices. You can core it. It's like you core an apple, and you can see what's left. You're left with a core. You're left with a star shape on either end. And if you want, you could use the skin tool, and you could stretch those, you know, connect those together, and you have a nice little curved ends on either side. Okay, so there's the core of the apple. What we can also do is, if we go back to, hold on here. Set it up again the same way. Let's go ahead and select drill. Let's select tunnel. What do you think will happen with tunnel? It just pokes a hole. It makes a tunnel all the way through. And you can see you have a tunnel all the way through. Cuts it all the way through. And remember, you don't see inside it because the sphere by default is one-sided. Lightwave assumes you're only going to see the outside of the sphere. So if we were to make it a double-sided sphere, you would see the inside, just like looking inside the shell of an egg, an eggshell. Okay, let's look at the other options. We have stencil. Stencil is pretty nifty. Remember, it can be any two-dimensional shape, which includes type. And it can, imagine this a child's ball. And on the side of the ball, so let me cancel this. Let's make a red ball, okay? So I'm going to hit Q, and I want this will be ball, B-A-L-L, and I want it to be a nice red ball, so make a nice red. Click OK, OK. I've got my red ball. And in the last couple of weeks, we worked with surfacing and taking an image of a star and sticking it on the side and being able to move it wherever we want. If you want something that is a part of the geometry of the ball, but to have the same effect, we can use this next feature, which is a Boolean function, which is Stencil. That we can take the shape and we can project it onto the ball. Plus side is that it's pretty easy to do. Downside is that it's permanent. It becomes a part of the geometry, as you'll see in a moment. It's not something like that we did with the surfacing techniques where you can move it around and resize it and reposition it. It doesn't work that way. It's now a permanent part of the geometry. So now I'll select construct again. We're going to use drill. And this time I'll select stencil. And also surface, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use the default surface for the slice that goes through. Now if I had other surfaces, I could choose from them as well. Click OK and notice what it did. Look at the geometry in wireframe and notice it projected all the way through. And this is now cut through, and you can select these polygons in here. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Let's go ahead and select polygons. I don't want that one. Okay, notice that I've selected these, and you can hit Q now. New surface, and I'll name it star. You can leave it the same color. I can select it, and as I said, I want a nice bright yellow. Click OK. Now, see, I forgot one of those. I didn't select all the polygons on one of these, but you get the idea. But it is now, it projected that on there, and it altered the geometry. Look at all the polygons it's created. Yes? You can't do it, you can't partially cut. The only way you can partially cut is the other Boolean function that I showed you where you only overlap it part of the way.
But like, if you laid anything else in that attribute, it would also go through that?
Huh?
If you laid anything else in that attribute, it would also go through that? Or is that
Anything, yeah, anytime you use these, it projects all the way through. But remember, on the other side, I could select these polygons, which I could do now. I could select, let's zoom in here so I can see a little bit better. I can select these polygons. Try to make sure I have them all selected. And it's a little bit of trickery, but I can hit Q to change the surface, and I don't want it to fall. I'll make it ball and see how it will blend with everything. So now it looks like the star is only on one side. That's the only way you can do this. Using this tool, that is. Okay? But, you know, I mean, if you want to, if you're making an airplane, or in the case here, your toy, and you want to apply text on the side of it, and you want to make it a permanent, you know, fix it permanently, you can do that. Okay? More? Want some more? Or you want some time to work? There is the solid drill, which is similar to this. Let me do the solid drill, and then I'll be done for today. The solid drill is similar to the drill tool, but it differs in two regards. The solid drill, instead of a two-dimensional shape, you have to work with a three-dimensional form. So it's two three-dimensional forms. The difference, the second difference is that you're not restricted to just the X, Y, or Z axis, but you have the same features: core, you know, tunnel. You get it, but you can go in any direction. Stencil, and you got the idea. So let me undo a bunch of these. And I'm going to switch to the cutter view. In order to get this three-dimensional, again, the quickest way of doing that would probably be to select under multiply, select extrude. We can go ahead and click and drag all the way through here. And again, I've got it facing the wrong way. See how it looks inside out? So what I'm going to try to do is just hit F or flip, and that looks right. Okay, so now I have this extruded piece. Now I'll go ahead and put this, the other one in the foreground, this one in the background. Now let's go ahead and move the background one a little bit, so to position this properly. T for move it over. It really needs to be stretched. So I'm going to go ahead and hit H for stretch, and let's go ahead and stretch this like so. So it really, it has to overlap. But the other thing that I can do too, see, it's still lined along the x-axis. What if I go ahead and I hit Y, and I rotate this like so, and then maybe rotate this like so. So it's not following any axis. Make sense? Now, again, I want the ball in the foreground. I want the star or extruded shape in the background, and the background shape will serve as the cutter. So I go to construct. I select solid drill now, and I have the same options: core, tunnel, stencil, and slice. See? But I'm not restricted to the X, Y, or Z axis. Okay? That's the principal difference between drill and solid drill. Now, there's some other tools that I want to talk about on Wednesday. The rounder tool, which is really pretty cool, and how to effectively use that. It's really very nice. Router is very similar, and they're really some very useful tools. rounder here, edge bevel, mostly the rounder tool, and that can be really, really very nifty. Okay? You might want to look at some of these yourself. We will be using the magic bevel on another day. The seashell tool is kind of bizarre, but if you want to create kind of like a conch shell where it actually extrudes in this spiral kind of seashell-y kind of form, it will do that. It's hard, I found very hard to control, but you know, there's some other tools that do very specialized things, but similar. Okay, so these are some more sophisticated tools for you to put in your arsenal that you may or may not want to use for your toy assignment, or as it happens in your final assignment, whatever you're doing. Again, you may not use any of these tools throughout the semester, but in future date, you might come across a model you're building and you go, you know, I remember him talking about that one tool. That would be the right one, you know, for the right, you know, it's the right time, right tool. I think I'm going to try it. That's really what this is about. Okay? So for the remainder of today, go ahead and work on your toy project.